It's one of the strangest puzzles in our entire story. For tens of thousands of years, humans just like us with the same brains and capacity for imagination moved across the earth, hunting, gathering, surviving. But through all that time, there is a strange silence. No cave art, no symbols, no hint of deeper meaning. Almost as if the story of humanity paused, waiting for something to awaken. It's as if a hole opened in time itself, swallowing every spark of culture, every whisper of myth, every glimmer of wonder. Then, out of nowhere, a flood of creativity explodes. Art on cave walls, beads strung like poetry, tools as complex as a chess master's plan. So what happened? How did we lose centuries of human memory? Why did the world's first artists, storytellers, and thinkers seem to rise from nowhere after an age of silence? This is the Prehistoric Time Hole, and its secrets could change everything we thought we knew about who we are. Picture this. 200,000 years ago, modern humans had already appeared. Physically, they were indistinguishable from us. Same hands, same minds, same capacity for imagination. And yet, for more than 100,000 years, the archaeological record is eerily silent. There are stone tools, yes, sharp, efficient, practical, but nothing else. No article, no musical instruments, no jewelry, no signs of religion or elaborate burial. It's as if our ancestors were stuck in a permanent pause, repeating the same survival tasks without ever stepping beyond them. Archaeologists call this period a behavioral gap, a time when anatomically modern humans seem to have had no spark of creativity, no visible culture, no storytelling to pass down. But how is that possible? These were humans with brains every bit as capable as ours. Shouldn't they have been painting, singing, dancing, dreaming? Why leave behind nothing but blades and bones? It's a riddle that has haunted scientists for decades. Was it really a gap in behavior? Or just a gap in what survived? Maybe time itself is playing a trick on us, swallowing the evidence before it ever reached our eyes. Or maybe something far more extraordinary happened. A collapse of knowledge, a break in memory, a missing chapter that we have yet to decode. Somewhere between a sharpened stone and a painted bison, an entire chapter of humanity went missing. And to understand how, we need to look in the coldest, most forgotten places on Earth. What evidence lies frozen? If the past seemed to vanish, maybe it was simply buried, trapped in the deep freeze of the planet itself. For tens of thousands of years, glaciers scraped across entire continents, grinding forests, rivers, and entire settlements into oblivion. Everything in their path was crushed, churned, or swept away. In places where people once lived, entire layers of archaeological evidence were erased, leaving only the most durable traces of survival behind. But the ice didn't only destroy, it also preserved. Beneath layers of permafrost and deep sediments, true time capsules remain hidden, locked away from decay for millennia. Ancient footprints, carved bones, woven fibers, seeds, pigments, even traces of pollen, all of these lie frozen, fragile, waiting for a chance to be rediscovered. In recent years, scientists have begun to tap into these frozen archives, thanks to melting glaciers and thawing permafrost triggered by climate change. And what they're finding is remarkable. In 2014, researchers discovered a perfectly preserved wooden hunting spear in the melting ice of Norway, a weapon lost more than 3,000 years ago, its handle smoothed by countless hunts. In Alaska, archaeologists uncovered 11,500-year-old hunting tools trapped in the thawing ice, giving clues to the earliest people who crossed into North America. Even older wonders lie under the ice of Siberia. In the Amal Peninsula, mummified bodies of children and adults have emerged from the permafrost, preserved with fur clothing, beads, and even tattoo marks. These remains reveal elaborate burial rituals and sophisticated social structures, dating to times once considered culturally empty. And high in the Alps, the body of Ötzi the Iceman, discovered in 1991, continues to challenge assumptions. Frozen in a glacier for over 5,000 years, he carried a copper axe, grass-insulated shoes, and a complex toolkit far beyond what archaeologists expected from his era. Ötzi's tattoos and possible medicinal herbs suggest a knowledge of healing that had never been recorded in writing. These frozen time vaults are rewriting history, showing us that even during periods we once called the prehistoric dark, there was culture, technology, and meaning. What else still sleeps under the ice, hidden for tens of thousands of years? Could there be evidence of music, myth, or even the first traces of language, locked away in glaciers or permafrost that no one has yet explored? Every season, as temperatures rise, archaeologists scramble to reach newly exposed ice patches before they decay. Because once these relics hit warm air, they can vanish in days. The window is small, the stakes are enormous. Because each artifact that emerges from the deep freeze is a message from a world we thought was silent, proof that the so-called prehistoric time hole might not have been empty after all, just waiting to be thawed. What if the evidence was never buried at all, because the cultures themselves disappeared, leaving barely a trace behind? Throughout human prehistory, entire societies may have risen, flourished, and then vanished without passing their stories on. These were groups that left behind no writing, no monumental architecture, only perishable traditions that faded when they did. Think of oral cultures. Everything they knew depended on memory, on spoken stories carried by elders, on songs repeated around fires. If a generation was lost to disease, disaster, or conflict, then their knowledge could vanish instantly. Anthropologists have documented this fragile chain of memory even in recent centuries. In the 19th century, indigenous Tasmanian languages and cultural practices were nearly wiped out within a single human lifetime, once colonial violence severed their lines of transmission. If something so complete can be lost in just a few decades, imagine how easily a prehistoric culture with no written language could disappear in a single catastrophe. And catastrophes were common. Volcanic eruptions, prolonged drought, sudden climate swings, any of these could scatter or extinguish a community. The eruption of Mount Toba about 74,000 years ago, for example, may have plunged the planet into a volcanic winter, shrinking human populations to the brink of extinction. If entire bands perished or splintered, their stories would die with them. And with them, any knowledge of art, beliefs, songs, or mythologies. There's another clue to consider: genetic bottlenecks. Studies show that humanity went through dramatic population crashes, where as few as a couple thousand breeding individuals survived to repopulate the world. These events would have shattered cultural traditions, breaking apart social networks that had carried knowledge for generations. Imagine a group of 50 people, keepers of some of the first symbolic art or ritual practices, wiped out in a harsh winter. There would be no one left to remember what those paintings meant. No one left to pass on the sacred songs or burial rituals. In a world without books, that kind of loss was total. Archaeologists believe this may explain why we see sudden explosions of creativity after long silences. It wasn't that humans lacked imagination during those quiet centuries, but that entire cultural chains were severed again and again, forcing survivors to start over from scratch. Like a library burned to ash, every time memory was lost, humanity had to rebuild its sense of meaning, its myths, its sense of belonging. And so the prehistoric time hole might not be a hole in evidence, but a graveyard of forgotten cultures, each one leaving only echoes behind. If memories can vanish, so can the land itself. Throughout deep time, our planet has been a relentless destroyer of evidence, wiping the slate clean again and again. Floods, landslides, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions. These forces reshape landscapes, burying entire settlements, smashing fragile artifacts, and scattering human remains across vast distances. Look at Doggerland, a now submerged plain that once connected Britain to mainland Europe. During the last ice age, people lived there, hunting, gathering, raising families on dry grasslands. When the seas rose after the glaciers melted, those homes, their tools, and their stories were swallowed by the North Sea. Today, fishermen still dredge up bone tools and spear points from what was once a thriving human landscape. It's a pattern repeated across the globe. Rising seas have erased entire coastal settlements, leaving only hints of their existence. Tsunamis, like the one generated by the Storegga slide off Norway over 8,000 years ago, could devastate whole communities in minutes. And it goes deeper. Erosion can grind away millennia of evidence, while shifting rivers bury artifacts under meters of mud. In tropical regions, acidic soils dissolve organic materials in just a few decades, leaving behind only stone tools while wiping out any trace of wood, textiles, or even bone. Then there are supervolcanoes. Around 74,000 years ago, Mount Toba in what is now Indonesia unleashed one of the greatest volcanic catastrophes in human history. Ash and sulfur plunged the world into a volcanic winter, possibly killing plants, animals, and even human bands across vast areas. A disaster like that doesn't just take lives, it destroys everything those lives built. And let's not forget glaciers, which advanced and retreated again and again, scouring the continents to bedrock and leaving only a handful of surviving traces behind. If you think of the archaeological record as a vast, fragile library, then Earth itself has been the ultimate censor, tearing out entire chapters and burning others to ash. No wonder so much of the prehistoric world looks empty. It may have been rich with songs, symbols, and stories, only to be erased by time, tide, fire, and ice. So, when we search for meaning in the prehistoric time hole, we're up against not just the failures of memory, but the raw, destructive power of nature itself. And still, against all odds, a few clues survive. For most of our prehistory, Homo sapiens were not alone. We shared the world with other humans, cousins whose names we only learned recently, and whose lives remain cloaked in mystery. Neanderthals walked the forests and steppes of Ice Age Europe as skilled hunters, fire makers, and even artists. Recent studies have dated Neanderthal cave paintings in Spain to at least 64,000 years ago, tens of thousands of years before modern humans arrived there. These weren't mindless brutes. They had culture, perhaps even spiritual beliefs. And then there were the Denisovans, identified only in 2010 from a tiny fragment of bone in a cave in Siberia. From that small clue, we now know they left a genetic legacy across Asia and the Pacific, living, thriving, and even interbreeding with Homo sapiens. In 2019, a carefully crafted green chloridolite bracelet was discovered in the Denisova cave, drilled and polished with astonishing skill more than 40,000 years ago. A masterpiece by any measure. But the puzzle goes even deeper. Genetic research has revealed what scientists call ghost lineages, evidence of hominin groups we've never even seen in the fossil record. Their DNA shows up in our own genomes, like fingerprints without a face, hinting that entire branches of the human family tree lived and died without leaving so much as a skull behind. What stories did they carry? What songs did they sing? In South Africa, Homo naledi stunned scientists with its combination of primitive and advanced features. With a brain only a third the size of ours, yet evidence suggesting they buried their dead in deliberate chamber graves, they challenge our ideas about what intelligent really means. And in Indonesia, the tiny Homo floresiensis, the so-called hobbit, lived on the island of Flores until perhaps 50,000 years ago, fashioning stone tools and hunting giant rats. These were humans unlike us, but still human in their creativity and adaptability. All these species coexisted, sometimes peacefully, sometimes competitively. They may have traded, fought, loved, or even blended together. And if nature erased the evidence and lost cultures vanished before their stories could spread, is there any way to recover what really happened? That's the mission of modern archaeology, to rebuild humanity's lost timeline, one fragile clue at a time. Advances in ancient DNA are transforming what we know. By sampling bone fragments no bigger than a fingernail, geneticists can reconstruct entire lineages, finding relationships between people who died thousands of miles and thousands of years apart. From Neanderthal tooth enamel to Denisovan pinky bones, these genetic threads are helping to weave back together a tapestry of migration, interbreeding, and adaptation. There's also the science of sediment DNA. Yes, even dirt itself can preserve genetic traces. At sites where no bones survived, scientists have recovered Neanderthal DNA from cave floor sediments, showing they once lived there even though their bodies are long gone. It's like reading a ghostly signature in the dust. And then there is the revolution in dating techniques. Tools like optically stimulated luminescence, or OSL, allow researchers to measure the last time a grain of quartz was exposed to sunlight, providing precise dates for otherwise impossible to read layers of prehistory. These breakthroughs are letting us see deeper, clearer, and more confidently than ever before. But even with these powerful tools, the gaps remain. For every ancient carving that is found, 1,000 more may have been ground to dust. For every fragment of an ancient campfire uncovered, entire campsites may lie washed away by rivers or buried beneath modern cities, unreachable. Rebuilding the timeline will always be a puzzle with missing pieces, but each new discovery reshapes the story, challenging assumptions and revealing that prehistory was far richer, far more complex than the old textbooks ever imagined. It may never be complete, but with every ancient genome, every pigment-stained shell, every carefully dated hearth, we stitch a little more of our shared human story back together. The prehistoric time hole may never fully close, but piece by piece, we are learning how to bridge it. Even with all the science, all the funding, and all the fascination we pour into our origins, archaeology is still haunted by its own blind spots. First, there's bias. For more than a century, the majority of digs and research focused on Europe, because that's where many early archaeologists worked and lived. It created a distorted view of human evolution, as if Europe were the stage on which modern humanity first appeared. But we now know that crucial chapters of our story unfolded across Africa, Asia, and beyond, where fewer studies have been done and countless sites remain unexplored. Then there's the tyranny of preservation. The materials most likely to survive, stone, bone, pottery, skew our perspective. Perishable objects like wood carvings, woven baskets, clothing, or musical instruments simply vanish, leaving us with a lopsided picture of daily life. How many brilliant technologies were made of wood, or leather, or plant fibers now turn to dust without a trace? And there's the problem of scale. Entire human settlements might lie buried under modern cities, under highways, or under farmland. We build on top of our past, layering new stories over old ones. Unless a construction crew happens to hit something by accident, those chapters might never be uncovered. Confirmation bias can also cloud our view. We love neat stories, breakthroughs, revolutions, sudden leaps forward. But real human history is often messy, gradual, and full of false starts. Sometimes archaeologists overlook slow-building traditions because they're hunting for dramatic moments, like the first cave painting or the first burial. And finally, there's the vastness of time itself. Acknowledging these blind spots doesn't make the field weaker, it makes it stronger. It reminds us that the prehistoric time hole is not just about missing evidence, but also about how we choose to look for it and what questions we dare to ask. Because sometimes the hardest part of finding the truth is seeing past our own expectations. We think of lost history as something that only happens to ancient people, to fragile cultures without writing or cities. But what if it could happen to us? Our own world feels permanent. Satellites in orbit, hard drives full of data, skyscrapers built of steel and glass. Yet even our civilization is far more vulnerable than we like to believe. Imagine a massive volcanic eruption tomorrow, on the scale of Mount Toba. Global temperatures crash, crops fail, populations collapse. In just a few decades, everything from language to science to art could fade. Or think of rising seas swallowing coastal cities just as they once swallowed Doggerland. Whole archives of knowledge, digital and paper, could vanish beneath the waves. Consider war, pandemics, or climate change accelerating beyond control. Our modern world is built on fragile systems, interconnected yet easily disrupted. If those systems fell apart, what would survive? Maybe a few concrete ruins, a scattering of metal tools, a handful of preserved bodies in sealed tombs. But all our stories, our music, our books, our memories, without people to keep them alive, they could vanish in an eye blink of geological time. The prehistoric time hole is a warning. It tells us how easily culture can dissolve, how quickly knowledge can be lost when people are scattered, isolated, or destroyed. If the ancient world could forget whole centuries of its own dreams, what makes us so certain the same could never happen again? Maybe the greatest lesson from those missing ages isn't about the past at all, but about protecting the future. So, what really lies behind the prehistoric time hole? Maybe it was ice, smashing and grinding away the record of early dreams. Maybe it was disaster, scattering cultures before they could pass on their songs. Maybe it was us, blind spots and biases, missing what was right beneath our feet. Or maybe it was all of these things, woven together. Still, a few echoes made it through. A shell bead carved by an unknown hand, a cave painting shaded by flickering firelight, a burial carefully arranged, telling us that even in the depths of time, humans cared. Those echoes remind us that we are not the first to wonder, to hope, to dream. Our ancestors may have lost their voices, but they left clues for us to find. And now, it's our turn to listen, to dig, to question, to guard our own fragile memories against the next wave of forgetting. Because one day, someone might look back at us, sifting through the rubble of our cities, asking the same question we ask of them. What happened here? If this story sparked a question, a moment of curiosity, or a sense of awe, don't let it end here. Subscribe, leave a comment, and share what part of the prehistoric time hole you find most mysterious. Thanks for being part of the story. Until next time, keep listening to the echoes.